Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Oh, it feels like an age. It feels like an age since we all came together on Reality Bytes. But it is, for those who know, the show within a show within a show where the Reality Bytes team gets to interview a fascinating Nexthinker. And have we got a fascinating Nexthinker for you today? We'll get to him momentarily. But just to say that you may have noticed, we had a week off. We had a week off. We had 2 weeks off, in fact, over the last month. And that's because, of course, we were out in Boston, we were out in London, helping with experience, helping run experience in various ways across the team, and also recording bumper episodes at both experience events. By the time you hear this, they'll both be available not only on the usual feed, but on the YouTube, on the Nexthink YouTube channel as well. So you can, it's an audio video presentation this time around. But we are, on the one hand, all a little tired and very, very, I think, very happy with how the experience events went, both in Boston and in London. On the other, really excited to get back on the horse and get back to usual scheduling, usual programming. So with that, let's welcome Nexthink Senior Channel Director, Chris Sibold, to the show. Hi, Chris. Welcome for your first time Reality Bytes. So it's great to have you on.
Hey, Tom. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
That is no problem. Tell the listeners, first of all, Chris, a little bit about what you do at Nexthink and I guess what brought you to the role in terms of your previous career experience.
Sure. So actually, just you mentioned I was a channel director, and I have been for the last 3.5 years. But actually, I moved into an interesting role here as of January as the senior director of public sector, and so that's actually a little bit of a different role than what I had for the last several years.
Got it. Well, can I just say, Chris, I know this is exactly, as listeners will soon know, what we're here to discuss, so that makes perfect sense. But you got to update your teams. You got to update your team's job description. Your title, I got it fresh from Teams, just double checking. So I knew you specialized or were a specialist in the public sector, as we'll be discussing today. But I didn't realize you'd switched your title, to be honest. So that was your previous 3 years, though. And what about prior to that?
Yeah. So prior to that, so the last several years, I've been part of Nexthink's channels and alliances team, helping drive basically the development of our resell and our local managed service provider partners here in North America. But the whole time that I have been doing that, kind of some of my background really is in public sector, and it's something I'm very passionate about, which is kind of what led me to make this switch in January this year. Is that so now in my current role? I really focus in on all things go-to-market related to the public sector. And for kind of those who don't hear the acronyms in the description, public sector from our perspective is both the U.S. kind of federal level government, the national level government, as well as the state and local level governments as well. So kind of really two big IT markets that all fall under that umbrella of public sector. But I've been, again, helping work with all of our cross-functional teams from engineering, sales, marketing, everything in our efforts to really enter and help to support these customers in their really important work in that market segment.
Fantastic, and we'll get to it in more detail. I know we've got Oriana, Sean, and Tim with us today, by the way, who all have questions for you in this area. But what was how did you build that expertise in this kind of, as I understand, very, very complex domain?
So it's kind of a twofold. What is that? Prior to my technology career here, I actually was an Air Force officer for the first 6 years of my professional life. So 2001 to 2007, I was an Air Force logistics officer serving globally all around the world. So that actually kind of let me see firsthand some of the challenges because I know you guys have talked to a lot of commercial customers, and there is a lot of challenge in the world that digital employee experience helps solve. I believe it's a particular type of challenge that you see in the government space. So everybody, for example, has a, hey, what's your application kind of problem? Like when you realize DEX could solve something for you. Mine was a unique one. Is that I'll give you a quick example. Is that I actually ran an aerial port. So kind of think of like a UPS hub for the military out in the Middle East during my tenure. And one of the big applications we had that was mission critical was basically the system that allowed us to share between stations what was the load plan, what was the schedule, basically what was coming in on the next airplane and when was it coming in. Because of some of the network configuration, the way things were set up, that application didn't work. And the IT team that was supporting us regionally didn't even know it didn't work. And we didn't have an easy way to explain to them why it didn't work. So our solution, instead of basically pulling up this complex application that would tell you everything about what was on the airplane, we just had to step outside and look up in the air and see if, hey, did the schedule, like I got an email that said that this airplane should be landing shortly. Let's go look outside and see if we can find it.
That sounds like an important thing to know. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm no expert in the workings of the Air Force, but that sounds significant. And I think, in fact, Oriana you have a question, Oriana, sort of about that whole dynamic more broadly, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing story, though. I mean, it sounds like using a weather rock to tell what the weather is. Um, so, something that I was curious about is the differences that you've seen with this very broad experience between IT more generally and the private sector at large. Both with the challenges that they have, like you were talking about, but also how they perceive DEX. What is the status of DEX in the private sector versus the public sector?
That's a really good question. It's an interesting one. I would say this is that in the public sector, so I feel like from all my peers and just seeing what's going on in the market, that the private sector has really come to realize the value of digital employee experience in DEX and what it can do for them. And despite kind of the name where it's it's about employee experience, I believe that many organizations there are starting to realize it's not just a nice to have. It's mission critical, and it's going to be fundamentally kind of change the way that they do IT operations. In the public sector, there are many opportunities to solve these problems, because one kind of unique facet of public sector that's different than private is that there is a lot of technical debt, and there's a lot of legacy technology. And that's for a couple good reasons. One is the way that the government acquires and budgets for technology. There are acquisition rules that are there for very important reasons, but kind of a follow-on effect of that is that it makes it challenging to be able to buy and procure technology and keep pace with the change that's going on in the technology world. And because of that, again, a lot of legacy technology that they can't shut down. They have to operate. The Department of Transportation has to run. They can't just shut down because they're doing a cloud modernization, for example. And so, because of that, I think that public sector is just now starting to realize what a lot of the private sector has, is that, hey, despite the name, this is not a nice to have. That it honestly, DEX is probably more important for the IT operations team in public sector than it might be for the end user. And there's tremendous opportunity to enhance the end user experience, but it really is more fundamental and transformational for how the IT operations team does their job and supports the agencies.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, do you see anyone, or anything in particular that's driving those changes?
So, what I've seen is that it's really the visibility, the data, the information that they could have. So if I could, and I would do a terrible job of this, but if I renamed DEX, or Digital Employee Experience, I would call it IT visibility. Is that you look at these IT organizations, and really the ones that start to see this and just have the visibility, the insight to what's driving the root cause, what's driving the challenge. Because right now, the way that IT organizations operate in public sector, there's a lot of silos, even more than in private sector. Some of that is because of the way they procure it. There might be multiple service providers servicing a particular customer. And so that typical process of, hey, let's diagnose the root cause, let's share data, is it the network? Is it the endpoint? Is it an application? That becomes even more political, if you will, because you're working with multiple service providers. So if you could imagine that, hey, I've got this visibility, I've got this data. I mean, it's quantifiable, it's incontrovertible, and I can share it and gain consensus to really drive the change management process versus pointing a lot of fingers. Because without that data, I think it's particularly challenging for ITU organizations to be able to kind of solidify around what a change needs to happen in an end user computing estate, because they are so complex and there's so many different players and silos involved.
Right, that makes sense. Sean, did you also have a question related to that?
I did. Thank you. Hi, Chris. I wanted to know, I guess, related to DEX and the public sector, what are some misconceptions that you've heard, and what would you say to any listeners who might think DEX is just a luxury for employees?
Um, so I think it goes back to that fact that, hey, this is not just really about the end user experience. It's really about the IT team and their ability to become proactive. There's a really interesting story that happened in the news several years ago. There was an Air Force civilian employee back in about 2020, 2021, who became so frustrated. And I think Tim has heard this one before, but became so frustrated with his ability to just fire up his laptop and do his job. He was actually in an AI think tank for the Air Force. It's a really important job, very knowledgeable worker. And he just got frustrated because it would take him 45 minutes to boot his machine. It would take him another 30 minutes to open up Microsoft Outlook. He'd try to open up a PDF so he could sign it, and it would crash, or it'd take 15, 20 minutes. And he got to the point that he actually, and this never happens in organizations like the military, is so frustrated that he actually turned to Twitter, or now X, and actually put out a rant. And it was called #FixOurComputers. And he basically told the government, he said, look, you want us to basically prepare for the next big challenge, the next big threat that we need to prepare for. We want to do our jobs. We're invested like no other workforce in the world. But before you buy another $1 billion piece of hardware or spend tens of millions of dollars on some new initiative, just make my computer work. Just get it to work, get it to turn on. Let me get access to the applications that I need to be able to do my job. And that was kind of such an earth-shattering thing in the public sector, and I believe in the military, that somebody would kind of publicly air the dirty laundry there. But to their to their effort, basically the DoD and the Air Force at the CIO level, they acknowledged it. They said, yes, we understand we've got a challenge here. We've got to figure out a better way to do business, a better way to support the end user, because it can't just all be about security. We've got to balance that security with the end user productivity, because if I secure the laptop to the point that it's a brick, it's really pointless, because you can't do your job. You can't carry out your mission.
That's great. And I'm curious, almost kind of doing the inverse of that. So we know like all the frustrations that particular user had, but like what would the impact be, say, of a strong DEX on the public sector productivity? Is there any way you could articulate that for us?
Yes. So I think it goes back to the fact that you look at state level government, at federal level government, there is a desire, and I think this was really accelerated by the pandemic, as that there's a desire to provide digital experience and digital services to citizens. So the digital channel was one, in my opinion, that was kind of maybe neglected prior to the pandemic, because government could always fall back to the in-person channel. Is that I need to provide this capability to you. You need to be able, as an example, to show up and get your driver's license, or renew your driver's license, maybe. And all right, well, if I can't figure out how to provide a decent digital online experience to make that renewal happen, I can always just say, you know what, Chris, show up in our office. It might be a little bit of a pain for you, but show up and renew your license there. That's really not an option now, because number one, there's a preference for that digital capability, and the pandemic kind of highlighted that, as that governments really across the board are now saying, we need to provide this capability. We need to provide a digital channel for these things, and they need to be the equivalent, or if not better, than that in-person experience. It can't be kind of a hodgepodge, if you will. And so that's really a big game changer, is that now they have to focus in on that. And really an underlying aspect of that, as I think we're all aware, is the employee experience. Is that, hey, if I've got this great online platform for the citizen to engage to do these things, but I can't log in. I can't get access to it. I have challenges getting the data I need to serve that person's request. That really doesn't solve the problem all the way. So DEX is really, it's kind of a secret, if you will, to helping serve the citizens, is that I think more agencies are starting to see the connection there, that it's an underlying pillar, it's an enabler. But I think that that's something that's just now starting to really be seen publicly.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And then final question from me. I mean, I'm sure we can imagine some of these, but I'm curious from your point of view, like what unique challenges do you think DEX faces within a highly regulated public sector environment?
That's a really interesting one. So, in these highly regulated parts of the government, these are organizations in areas where, these networks may not even be connected to the internet. So there's no access to the internet. They're completely segregated. There's very little visibility. And in fact, just being able to get to the network and get approval to deploy technology onto that network is a challenge in and of itself. So one of the things, to be honest, is just as a DEX provider like Nexthink, is being able to comply with all of the certifications, the security requirements that are must-haves just to be able to deploy your technology out there to help do the job. That provides a lot of overhead. That actually is it really taxes somebody's engineering organization. You've got to be of a particular size and level of maturity just to be able to support these multiple certifications. It's not just one, there's several of them that really kind of combine together. So there's that piece, is just the overhead of servicing a customer like that, because they really make you do particular things and support your technology in one way. But the other one, again, it's just that lack of direct access to it, and the fact that I think culturally, these networks, and I'm thinking of, again, the ones that are offline, that there's no even direct access to the internet, they're just used to kind of a poor experience, and it is what it is. But I go back to my example of being able to look up in the sky, and see if they get the application working, is that there is a better way to do it. And I think it's kind of the other piece there is just helping people understand that, hey, we can help solve problems even in environments like this, and that fundamentally kind of the technical challenges are not necessarily different. Really, it's just the cultural piece, I think, is probably the thing that's most different from the private sector.
So, Chris, I'm the last at bat. We can explore a few things that we chatted about. I wish we had more time to explore some of them, but I'm going to disclose the day that we're recording this. So let me say Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet. So we've talked a lot when I have a chance to run into you at different events and conferences, and we've talked a lot about opportunities to help people serving in the public sector. The team's explored a little bit of it with you already, but what are some of the challenges that these employees have that DEX can help with? I love Oriana's analogy of the weather rock. Is it raining? I don't know. Is the rock wet? Right? Is the plane here? I don't know. Go look. Is it on the ground? How does that actually impact those employees, and how does DEX help make it better?
Yeah. I see a couple kind of fundamental areas that DEX could help public sector and employees in the public sector. Number one, as I mentioned, there is a lot of legacy technology. And I think the majority of the IT spend, you look at kind of all the analyst reports and what's going on in the market at both the federal and the state level, a majority of the IT spend and focus is going into digital transformation initiatives. So, government is working on improving that technology, providing more capabilities, but it's the managing, as I think, as everybody knows, a lot of digital transformation initiatives fail because they're not widely adopted, or something happens in the process of that adoption that keeps it from kind of achieving what the potential is of that new technology. So helping manage those, and a good example that just comes to mind, there is a mandate across the U.S. federal government to implement zero trust networking. So this is a re-architecture of the way that all of their networks are designed and architected. And again, on the face of it, sure, all right, we're going to comply with security. That just causes so many different fundamental challenges and potential for issues with the employee experience, which leads me to the other point, is that kind of right now within government IT, You're seeing more so than I think other industries. You're seeing a lot of those IT employees are really aging out and retiring, and there is a big shift to the next generation of government IT employees,
Right.
and they have an expectation, just like everybody else. That in your personal life, I want it to just work. I can open Gmail, and there's no problem with that. Why can't my government application that I need access to? Why can't it just work like that? So employee retention and hiring, recruitment is really one of the other big ones that it helps, which goes back to, we're investing in digital transformation to make the experience better, to bring on more capabilities, but we need to kind of finish the drill and make sure that it actually does what we say it will do for the employee and for the citizen. And then the last one is that we talk about one of the big challenges is just the way that the government, again, for good reasons, the way that they budget on an annual basis, and then that flows down to a lot of the acquisition and procurement rules. And again, a lot of good reasons why it's done that way. But imagine if I had much more insight into the underlying challenges. That, hey, I know as a made up example that all of my endpoints are really the main cause or the main thing that is driving down the employee productivity and employee experience in my agency. Well, now it's a no-brainer to go ahead and budget for a hardware refresh. Conversely, if I discover that it's actually something different, I might not make that guess and say, oh, all right, you told me to hashtag fix my computers, and my best guess is that it's the age of the hardware. Well, maybe not. So the third piece, I think, is just providing the data, the actionable data that decision makers can use to go and request budget, because it takes time. It is a process, but providing that information and being able to do their job more easily, I think would be a big challenge that DEX could help address in public sector.
Sure. Yeah, I make the case all the time that everything IT touches breaks. You might not break everybody, but you're going to break a certain percentage of the population. And it's why in the private sector, it's why IT moves so slowly to avoid breakage, to identify it early, and they move very slowly. I can't imagine that on the public sector side, that we know government moves slowly already, right? And IT transformation in government has got to be a huge part of it. Lots to talk about there, lots of different pieces and parts to that puzzle. As IT leaders in the public sector are prioritizing things, how do you break it all down? What do they need to keep in mind when they're looking at a DEX program? What are they prioritizing? Is it better service to the public? Is it use cases? Is it, you talked about retention and recruitment? Where does ROI come into play? Are they looking to save money? What's the top priority, and how do they kind of put them in order?
So a lot of them if you look at the maturity of the market from a DEX perspective, it is early on. So a lot of it is prioritized around kind of tactical use cases. Is how do we go from reactive, purely reactive to more of a reactive plus, where I have much more insight to more quickly diagnose and then fix issues at scale. So a lot of focus is around that. But I would argue is that as a decision maker, sure, that's table stakes to be able to help from a DEX platform perspective. But once you get past that, because you're going to quickly get there and make that improvement, it's more long term. How can I become more strategic with this platform? So like we discussed, is how can I really understand trends and be able to translate that into my budgeting priorities, other strategic priorities for my agency and the mission that we support. So I would say it's really kind of that long-term value, not just the initial use case, but it's the other ones that follow on that are more proactive and then ultimately preventative in the environment.
Yeah. So I know we've only got a minute or two left. As you look at and as you talk with your contacts in the public sector, what do you think is missing as the development of DEX continues to mature? What might there be in terms of a use case or capability that's missing that could bring even bigger impact to that sector?
Okay, so this is an interesting one, is that just like everywhere else, there's a lot of hype around AI and generative AI. And especially in the public sector, it's a lot of hype that there's a lot of potential for AI to do good and to help, help drive the experience with citizens. I would argue that something that might be overlooked in that general hype and just noise about generative AI in general is that what is the kind of DEX tuned version of AI, and how can I really help apply that to the experience of employees. Is that I think it might be overlooked that just general generative AI, sure, there's a lot of value there, but you might need a specialist, something, in solving these problems that not only has that AI capability, but also the information and the insight, the automations to solve the problems. Is that what's good of diagnosing that if I can't really fix it, and drive that change across the organization. So I think that's something that might be overlooked, is just what version of AI and kind of is really needed to drive that enhanced employee experience.
Great stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know we've only got just a minute or two left, so I just want to make a point before we thank you, Chris, for saying, for people who are interested in hearing more about this discussion around sort of DEX in the public sector, please do listen to a show Tim and I recorded with New Axis, I think a year or so ago now, Tim. Dexifying the US government is what we call the episode. It's a great conversation. We will include links in the show notes as ever. And Chris, we would love to see you as well feature on the DEX Hub. I think some of these insights are worth unpacking a little more fully in black and white. So hopefully we can make that happen. And I'll be sure to add the links in the show notes to that article if and when it's published. Also, just remains to say thanks so much for coming on the show, Chris. Really, really significant topic, really interesting examples. And indeed, as Tim said, happy Veterans Day. And thank you for your service, even over here in the UK.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to be here. And I couldn't think of a better thing to do on Veterans Day than to talk about how we're going to improve employee experience in government like this. So that's a really great opportunity. And thank you so much.
Very good point. Thank you so much, Chris.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.